Thanks for joining us again on the Rise and Fall of Easterfest. I'm Justin Rouillon. Last time we heard about Easterfest rising from humble beginnings to become the biggest Christian music festival in Australia. Easterfest, originally known as the Australian Gospel Music Festival, played host to all manner of bands, from artists who were still cutting their teeth, all the way through to some of the biggest acts in Christian music at the time. You can't have a music festival without the music, and in this episode, that's exactly what we'll be looking at. What did the Australian music scene look like in the late 90s and early 2000s as the festival began to grow? How did local musicians help Easterfest build to a point where it could start to attract those bigger acts from overseas? And what did the festival do for Christian music in Australia? Music's at the top of the bill in this episode. In the late 90s, a group of civic leaders in Toowoomba float the idea of a gospel music festival for the city, in the same vein as Tamworth's Country Music Festival. The Australian Gospel Music Festival, or AGMF, needed artists and bands, and as fate would have it, there were booming Christian music scenes popping up all over the country. In Melbourne, Sydney, northern New South Wales, and of course Brisbane, whose scene was supported by other events like Groundswell and Manifesto, as well as the label Toowoomba Records. And when it came time to book artists for those first AGMFs, the event organisers looked to Australia's foremost Christian artist in Steve Grace. Steve's musical career had begun in the 80s, and in 1988, his second album, Children of the Western World, was certified gold by ARIA and had become one of the biggest selling Christian albums in Australia. Steve is also picked up by the US label Reunion, and by the mid-90s his profile in the US is enough for the Gospel Music Association of America to award him the International Artist of the Year for 1996. Throughout his career, Steve has always had a passion for the Australian outback, spending huge amounts of time playing to those in regional and remote Australia. So it was no surprise that Steve was headlining those very early festivals. This is Steve Grace talking to 96.5 in 2018.
I grew up as a missionary's kid in Papua New Guinea. I think as a kid I remembered people coming all that way to our little mission station, remembering how important we felt because people valued us and came to encourage us. And I've always loved that about what I can do with music. You can go to a remote area, you can go to a drought-stricken town, you can go to a town that's just been devastated with bushfires, and you can put on a barbecue and a concert and lift people's spirits and encourage them. And that's kind of been the foundation of my music over the years.
Steve's music would inspire the next generation of artists like Paul Coleman, who played alongside Steve Grace at the very first AGMF in 1999. Coleman, who would also go on to find success in the US, found himself amongst other icons of Australian music in the early days of AGMF.
I remember in one of the first Easterfests, I was staying at the Burke and Wills, and 5 o'clock in the morning there's this singing and playing in the next room, and it was going over and over, so I thought someone's writing a song. So I knocked on the door and it was Archie Roach, and I said, mate, you're a living legend, but it's 5 a.m. He goes, yeah, I just got this song idea, and I said, I know, I could write the second verse right now, but can you please do it somewhere else? I'm so sorry. I was half expecting him to punch me, but he was very nice, and I think he left, and that was a pretty funny memory.
All across Australia there were Christian music scenes flourishing, but by the late 90s there was none bigger than the Brisbane scene. Supported by events like Youth Alive, Manifesto, the Australia Day Music Marathons and Groundswell, there were plenty of opportunities for bands to perform, alongside the traditional pub and club shows that many bands chose to take advantage of. The larger events were even big enough to accommodate interstate artists, like when in 1997 a then unknown Paul Coleman found himself with an interesting slot at Groundswell.
I think it was 98, 97. And you know the gig that I had? The only gig I could get. It was playing in the foyer when people were leaving. That was my gig. I was very happy with it too, because it was just like total heckling people and getting it back. And, hey, you know, I'm adding them into songs. And so they congregated in the foyer. Maybe it was raining. Maybe God sent the rain just to give me a little bit of a leg up.
Brisbane in the late 90s sees a huge growth in the band scene, with bands like Beanbag, Battered Fish, Dumpster and Rhubarb all rising through the ranks and commanding respectable followings.
That era of Brisbane music was massive. And so me and my friends, I mean, we were at every Beanbag show. It was a must. You had to see them live. They were incredible.
Nathaniel McManus, aka Macca, would be inspired by the vibrancy of the late 90s Brisbane band scene to form his own band, a pop-punk outfit called Rookie.
Into the early 2000s was when bands like ours, like when Rookie and Soulframe and Alabaster Box and a few of the others like that sort of started coming through. But the memories was it was just healthy. There were youth groups putting on shows that we were able to play at, and tons of kids would be showing up. Not only did you have Easterfest, Sunfest, I mean, you also had festivals like Groundswell and things like that were another opportunity for bands like us to play at. But it was healthy. People went to shows. People loved going to see live music. And I think the bands there connected in a way that people wanted to come and see them. Definitely an amazing, healthy music scene with incredible bands. And if you can ever find them, like if you find a Dumpster album or a Beanbag album or any of those bands, if you find them on Spotify, just sink in, listen, because, I mean, they're incredible bands who wrote incredible songs. It's been hanging around way too long.
Such was the interest in the Brisbane scene that Beanbag would become the first signing for In Pop Records, founded by the Newsboys Peter Furler, their manager Wes Campbell and Brisbane businessman Dal Bray, while Dumpster's first album, See Through Me, was released in the US on Bulletproof Music. At the heart of the Brisbane scene was Toupee Records, founded by Jeremy Bennett of Battered Fish, alongside bandmates Caleb James and Matt Gray. The label was originally conceived as a vehicle to release Battered Fish's 1998 album Modern, with the idea that the band could do a better job of promoting the album than a traditional label. However, Toupee Records quickly grew to include other bands on their roster. This is Jeremy Bennett of Toupee Records.
So we decided we can do this better ourselves. So we kind of like forced the issue ahead of our next album, which was Modern. We did some demos. We funded Modern ourselves and we intended to put it out on a record label. Meanwhile, HooperCon, which is Chris Hetherington and Jason Elliott, they had a release coming up. And so that was the first release on Toupee Records. So at this time, it was me, Caleb, and Matt, which are the three guys from Battered Fish. But in the end, I was running it. Caleb was generally the talent scout, because he was producing a lot of bands at the time. He didn't produce HooperCon, but they were the first on the record label. So that was the reason for the record label, is because we thought we could do a better job. And I think we did.
In 1999, Toupee ended up with a bona fide hit record on its hands, following Rhubarb's win in the Brisbane edition of radio station Triple J's Unearthed competition. Unearthed was a talent competition that Triple J, the national youth broadcaster, ran for a decade from 1995 and helped launch the careers of a number of Australian artists, including Missy Higgins, Grint Spoon and Killing Heidi.
From my point of view, Rhubarb came from nowhere. Like I didn't know the guys, but they came to Caleb and asked, said, can you produce our album? And Caleb said, look, I think you should put these guys out on Toupee Records. And we did, and it went massive. I remember them coming to my house and saying, hey, have you had a listen to the record? We're going to put in for Triple J. Which song do you think you should put in? And I can't remember the options they gave me, but one of them was Zero. And I said, you need to put in Zero. And it was an equal winner.
And nothing changes after zero.
Interestingly, the album came out and we approached Triple J. They approached Triple J and said, look, we'd love to do Album of the Week. Triple J gets, no, our slots are full for the next 6 months. It's not going to happen. And then soon after, they got a call from Triple J saying, there's been a delay on one of the releases, so we've got a slot for you. Would you like to jump in? And they obviously jumped in. And Exerciser went on high rotation at that time, and it just blitzed. That hit, I think, number 20 in the Triple J Hottest 100 for the year. Like, ridiculous. Like, way exceeded expectations. We were sending boxes of CDs to Sanity Music, like boxes of CDs. It was just honestly ridiculous.
The Toupee roster of bands, Battered Fish, Dumpster, Tunjip and Rhubarb, as well as others who were soon to follow like Anti-Skeptic and the Henrys, would be mainstays of AGMF as it grew in the first few years of the new millennium. Outside of southeast Queensland, AGMF opened up opportunities for interstate bands to ply their trade in front of a new audience, and in some cases to hold special events within the festival. This is Matt Jacoby, lead singer with Geelong outfit Sons of Korah, who for the last 30 years have been putting the Psalms back to music.
I mean, we were always a band, but we had to scale down to make ourselves sort of travelable. As we grew and as we got greater opportunity through the festival, we were able to do more creative things and, you know, with the whole band. And we had an event within an event that we did in conjunction with Bible Society, because I'm very passionate about the power of music to actually help us to engage with Scripture. It's really my central passion. It's what we do with Sons of Korah with the Psalms. And it's partly why we linked with Bible Society originally. And so we organised an event within Easterfest called Word Fest, and we actually got a number of the artists that were performing at the festival to come and do a song based on Scripture. That is actually directly sort of singing Scripture. And so, yeah, we had a number of people coming and doing that. We had like a, performance poet. We had someone doing a dramatic Bible reading, this sort of little festival within a festival. And the crew from Easterfest were really open to doing that sort of thing, doing creative things within the festival and, to sort of spark something.
We sort of got them in there. No one knew who they were. And even, we said, look, we'll just cover their costs and we'll bring them up and show them off, because we didn't discover them. They'd been going since 93. But in 98, when I started working for the Bible Society, I was introduced to Matt, and we got them up and did a couple of churches up here, and we just loved it.
Steve Davies is the former state director of the Bible Society in Queensland.
It was just such a interesting way of, proclaiming God's word. And look, the Psalms are songs. So it's just a really smart way of doing it. And so I think, it was 2000 or 2001 when we got them up. I remember saying to Isaac, we'd love to get these guys in. And they didn't know, I don't think at that stage they knew a lot about the Sons of Korah. And so I think we got them into a couple of the smaller tents, and they became, just as people engaged with them, I think they were like a yearly fixture at that point. I think every year, the Sons of Korah, and slowly till they did the main stage, And the interesting thing, I think, for Easterfest is that it actually exposed them to a lot more people, but it also enabled them to actually grow as a band. Initially, when they started, it was basically a duo, and then there was a trio, and I just experienced their 30th anniversary, and there was a full orchestra. It was multimedia. It was amazing. I mean, it was really incredible to see the journey of this band.
Claire Hazard cut her teeth on the Brisbane music scene before relocating to Melbourne in the late 90s.
It just was a sort of a self-generating PR exercise without even trying. So a lot of people from radio would approach me throughout the weekend saying, can I grab you for interviews? It's funny, I was just talking to a lady in Toowoomba about the AGMF, and she said, oh, it was so fun, wasn't it? And I remember, I thought, no, it was hard work. You didn't go to the festival for fun, you worked. So you sang and you interviewed, and you sang and you interviewed. And then you were fanned out to sing at churches on the Sunday, and back at the time up Margaret Street, there were sort of little additional stages. So yes, a lot of radio contact and connection, which obviously would have then fed into more radio play, I think. And yes, a lot of people would approach you and say, hey, I've got a festival coming up at this location at this time. It was a one-stop shop, the AGMF.
Phil Gordian played drums with the Paul Coleman Trio, and after the trio's split, performed with artists like Roma Waterman, Simeon, Levi McGrath and Scott Darlow. His recollections of that time are one of unity and support from everyone involved in the Australian scene.
Lots of joys, I think, about the opportunities to collaborate with other musos and to kind of see what God was doing through Christian music. And a lot of artists around that time, bands like Dumpster, Rhubarb, The Frugals, Steve Grace, Alabaster Box, Compliments of Gus, Claire Hazard, heavy metal bands like Mortification, and another guy close to my heart, Scott Darlow. And look, many of these are who are working as hard or harder than us. It was such a great season of just seeing lots of creativity flesh out from lots of bands all over the country. But it was just so much fun, so much excitement that we got to share our music with larger audiences at a festival like AGMF in those years. I mean, festivals like AGMF, they're probably the only places you could go back in those days to hear a lot of music at all ages, at a concentrated and family-friendly environment, you know. And AGMF crowds were always so encouraging and embracing this new wave of music coming out of Australia's independent artists at that time. There was an excitement for more and also the future of what could be. And there was a feeling of expectation that something good was starting, you know, something was evolving at that time. And we were spurred on, definitely, watching all these other bands, like I mentioned, and they were flourishing around that time as well. There was really good camaraderie too, lots of fun together, great banter with the other bands, and it was good to see local churches investing time and lots of good-hearted volunteers running all the back end of the festival, AGMF. So it was a great atmosphere when all that stuff is happening, and we were particularly encouraged because we were convinced that we needed to write our own songs about, you know, the intersection of our faith in God and everyday life. And AGMF gave us another platform to share that music.
As AGMF grew, the festival organisers looked to start adding international acts to the festival, something that in the early days was an absolute challenge, no matter how ambitious the festival was.
I was actually in America. I was living in Nashville, touring over there with bands. I actually got the gig with a band called Audio Adrenaline, but then I had to come back to Australia. And when I came back, I couldn't get a visa to go back. So that's why I ended up back in Australia. And because I'd been over there and made some connections, I knew Isaac, and Isaac was putting on this festival, and he was having barriers to accessing international artists, particularly obviously the Christian artists in Nashville, of whom I'd just been hanging out with for a very long time. That was kind of my first introduction into what was happening in Australia, which was this festival that was going to happen. So at that stage, I was just helping with introductions, people who they were talking to, people that I knew very well.
This is Tony Moore, an Aussie session drummer who had lived in Nashville, had played with all manner of artists from small local bands through to major international acts, and who was well versed with the challenges of bringing overseas artists to a start-up Australian festival.
There's actually a couple of problems because obviously if you're bringing a band out, as opposed to a solo artist, that's a lot of money on air flights. It's a huge investment. And often it's like our summer's their winter, vice versa. So the summertime over there is actually their peak touring, which is winter over here. So they'll do most of their tours, and we used to, you know, do all the different festivals, Creation and, Atlanta Fest and all these different festivals through America. And that's where they're all touring around predominantly. And they get their biggest audiences at those events, and they are very big. So when those bands have to come over here, it's a bit of an unknown because they don't really know much about Australia except Aussie, 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 and whatever the newsboys told them. So when they get here, they realize it's a big country and there's a lot of gaps between major cities. So when you're playing, so in America, you can leave Nashville, drive 40 minutes, and you have a whole new audience, a whole new crowd of people that you're playing to. Here, obviously, we can drive an hour and still not get enough people to attend a show. So it's a financial logistic and a logistic issue. And then when they get here, they're not really sure on things like backline and what's going to be here. But that's one of the big barriers, even now, bringing bands out.
This is Linda Monteith, former Easterfest and AGMF event manager.
I think it ended up being often a year or two process where the booking agents would kind of know their artists wanted to come out to Australia. So they'd sort of have it in their brain, or we might do it the year after, leave space in their own schedules for that. But we had a very good relationship with the booking agents from all of the major talent agencies in the state, in Nashville. So it tended to be a really good relationship. And Dave and Isaac did really well on those type of relationships. But it did work out for the artists as well. They did want to come out here and get the exposure.
I was very involved from the beginning in the booking of artists, and at times that was an 18-month to 2-year process in terms of booking artists, not for the next festival, but for the one after. In some cases, it was more like a 7-year process. There was a few things that we did. Michael W. Smith, for instance, the year we finally got Michael W. Smith, it was like, I've only been trying to do this for 7 years.
Former event director Dave Schenk.
I was a teenager in the late 80s, early 90s, and I grew up on Michael W. Smith, pre-worship album days. So having spent 7 years trying to get him to the festival, he was very involved in his local church. So trying to get him to leave to come to Australia on Easter weekend. And we had this challenge with a few artists who are very committed to their churches that, no, it's Easter, I'm at home.
This is Michael W. Smith speaking to 96.5 ahead of his Easterfest appearance in 2012.
If I'm not mistaken, I think I have been invited to Easterfest quite a few times, and for just scheduling reasons, I've not been able to come and play, And I feel like in the early days, we used to play Australia a lot. I came there with Amy 2 or 3 times. I know I played the Big Picture tour there, possibly the Eye to Eye tour, but it's just been way too long. I don't really have an answer why, but I love Australia. I really do. I have a lot of friends there, and I'm just looking forward to coming back. I really think it's going to be an amazing night, and I've got so many fond memories of playing there. And obviously, played Hillsong and being with Darlene several times there. But the first times are pretty exciting, and obviously Easterfest is my first time, so there's a little bit of, I think, good kind of anxiety. We're pretty stoked and pretty pumped up about playing there. So I look forward to being with the people and hanging out. I'm going to be there probably for 4 or 5 days, and I'm going to take in a little Aussie culture. I'm ready for it.
So we eventually got him here. That was amazing. White Hart was by far my personal favourite show, that White Hart reunion show in 2014. That had been 7 or 8 years of going to them over and over and over again, and eventually convincing was Rick Florian, their lead singer, who'd been the holdout, to come back and do one more show.
It's just a lot of hard work, and you have to make a lot of calls to Nashville, where they're mostly all based, or their management is. And you've developed relationships, and I would say, though, it doesn't get any easier. Every year, the biggest challenge was always to book the artists.
Former Easterfest CEO Isaac Moody.
People may remember the Aussie dollar fluctuating a lot, and so in my tenure of running that music festival, I think we got down to 50 cents in the dollar, which meant it was twice as expensive for us Aussies to book an American band. And then at one point, I think we're $1.10. So it was good buying American artists in. The American artists that we brought across, or the Aussies who live in America, like Rebecca St. James and Newsboys, I think they loved coming to Australia. And we always tried to capitalise on that. And so a great friend of the festival, which was Red Frogs, Andy Goulet, he'd help us look after them, take them surfing at the Gold Coast and do all these things around the festival and give them a great Australian experience. We'd do that with bands like Switchfoot or others and say, hey, we can give you a great Easter weekend. And by the way, we'll bring you up to Toowoomba and you'll play it at this music festival and we'll pay you for that. But we're going to give you a great time. And I think that got some excitement in Nashville in particular in getting these bands over.
Guys like Switchfoot are surfers, so we organised, put the word out on what size boards do you need, lads, and organised them to go surfing with some of our crew and get them the surfboards they needed, and so they could hit some waves down the Goldie, Snapper. These are some of the best breaks in the world, and they've been watching that on WSL for years, and to go surf there is like a highlight for them. And even up Sunny Coast, up Noosa National Park, all around that sort of precinct.
Andy Goulet is the founder and director of Red Frogs Australia.
You can't forget in this era how big Steve Irwin was. Steve Irwin was a superstar globally, still is, one of the most well-known Aussies. So all they want to do is go to Australia Zoo and see Steve Irwin. And we'd ring the Australia Zoo and they'd meet us at the front with some dingoes and koalas to meet the boys as they arrived, and we'd organise like a celebrity tour of these things. And the other thing, just theme parks too, down the Gold Coast. We had a good relationship with Dreamworld and SeaWorld where we get them in for free, and also get them those special encounters like swimming with the dolphins and all those sort of things as well. So really the artist experience, we really wanted to come back and also tell their mates, because it's such a small world, the entertainment world, and people talk. So the more better value adds you could do, the more chance they're going to bring mates back and come back again themselves. So yeah, doing that. And also I guess the pastoral care role was so critical too, because they're away from families so much. So to be able to have some really good chats and be around them and provide a bit of that local family support for them, a family away from their family, to keep the health, of them as a person was so important, because it's very demanding, the music industry and the music scene. So to have a bit of normal people you could talk to was a great thing.
Once you start bringing in bands from overseas, there's a ton of moving parts and things can go wrong. Even if you're giving them a great experience off stage, those big international acts take their shows very seriously. And if those bands don't have the equipment they need to pull off their performance, things can go south quickly, as happened with Delirious when they headlined the festival in 2005. This is Tony Moore.
That particular show, that was crazy because they have a rider sheet. For people who don't know what a rider sheet is, a band has a set of requests that are required in order for them to reproduce their sound live. So back home in their studio, they might have certain amplifiers, certain stuff that it's not worth bringing them over because of the cost. So to keep costs down, they trust that they're going to be here and that they're going to be working and they're going to replicate their sound so that the audience hears it how they hear it. But on that particular show, I'm there setting up the back line, doing the kit. I had the kit that was his spec kit, and the sizes and everything. So, and when I do drum teching, which I had done for many, many years, I would research the artist, I'd work out their setup. So when they turn up, I've actually got it roughly set up, pretty accurate to how they have. So, drummer turns up, sits down and goes, man, this is actually right in the pocket. Like, you've done really, really well. It's because I've researched it and I'm not going in cold. I'm not saying there's the drums. It's pretty close. I do my best to get it right. But the problem came when they're sound checking and the guitar amps and stuff were not the spec and they were not producing the sound they needed. We will not be playing unless this can be corrected. And I'm just doing my thing on the drums. The drummer's happy. He's, hugs and kisses all round and we're all good there. But then I hear this on the side and I'm like, well, look, I can actually help here. And I just said, look, don't want to interrupt, but I can solve the problem if you need me to. And I just spoke to the manager, said, look, this is what I can get. What do you need? He said, yep, I can get all these things, no problem. So I got on my phone and rang a couple of my mates who were already on site with the gear because I knew they had it. Said, can you do me a real favor? I need you to pop it in your car. Just tell them you've got clearance from me to get through all the little checkpoints you have to move around Easterfest and get to the main stage, get back there, and I'll be out there and we'll load them all in. And that all happened within about 20, 30 minutes. And as the story goes, that's the time I saved Easterfest, apparently. That's what Shanky said anyway. So it was fun to actually have a problem and be able to solve it.
Sometimes you could just have the headaches that go along with immigration and visas for touring acts. Linda Monteith.
So every band needed a visa to get into the country, a performance visa. And then I remember there was a band called Light of Love out of Atlanta, I think. And they were switching their band members around like the week of the event. Just as about after they were just about to get on the airplane and they were like, oh, we've changed it. This guy's not coming anymore and this guy is. And I'm just like, what about the visa? But anyway, we'd get them in on tourist visas and it was fine. But there was a whole back end in getting visas done and approved, and the paperwork involved in that was not simple.
And sometimes you'd need to arrange a whole tour just to get the headline act you wanted to sign on for the festival.
And so I remember one year when Newsboys were coming out and we had to promise additional shows, and we ended up doing the shows. So I think this happened twice, where the Newsboys played at Easterfest, and then in the week after we ran them around the country doing shows in Sydney and Melbourne, I think, as well. So yeah, we just did this crazy stuff where you'd put on this huge festival and then you'd get on a plane and fly to another state to keep going. I don't know how we ever got the energy to do it.
When we come back, we'll have a look at ways AGMF and Easterfest opened up the doors for all manner of musical styles to be showcased at the event, and what doors the festival opened up for Australian bands to expand internationally. That's coming up on the Rise and Fall of Easterfest. We're back and looking at the music that helped make Easterfest and AGMF what it was. One of the best things about the festival's organising team was how open they were to include different musical styles on the bill. It wasn't just about the traditional pop rock fare. At AGMF and Easterfest, you could leave a performance from a folk outfit, jump into a metal band's mosh pit, and then chill out afterwards with a big band. Artists like Beck Lawton were favourites in the soul space, while Perth funk outfit The Jive Express was one of AGMF's first viral hits in the early years. It wasn't uncommon for special performances in the classical space to be included in the festival, or for the Easter weekend to feature concerts that focused on hymns. In 2013 and 14, there was 72 hours of non-stop worship music, while for the last 2 years of Easterfest, the Easter Jazz event ran adjacent to the main festival.
It's great to see the smiles on everybody's faces. We are so happy to be here. This is our second time here in Toowoomba for the Easterfest.
The a cappella group Naturally Seven was a little bit of everything and came to Easterfest on the back of 2 years of opening for jazz legend Michael Bublé on his world tour.
He needed an a cappella group that didn't take up too much room on the stage. He's got the big band on the stage, so he wanted some sort of outfit that, didn't take up too much room. We've been on tour with him for a while. There's no instruments. We call it vocal play. Everybody's familiar with a cappella. A cappella is when you sing without instruments. Vocal play is when you become the instrument. So we imitate every instrument that we're able to vocally wrap our minds around.
New World Sun were a Canadian funk and soul fusion band who were complete unknowns at their first festival appearance, but quickly became fan favourites. This is Joel Parisian, vocalist with New World Sun.
Looking forward to Easterfest in Australia. It's one of our 2 favourite festivals that we've ever played anywhere in the world, so we're really looking forward to that and connecting with our friends.
If you were a metalhead, there was plenty on offer for you year after year. The Australian metal band Mortification had played a number of years, including the very first AGMFs, and in 2013, Demon Hunters Ryan Clark told 96.5 that metal bands were not really what they were often made out to be.
I think people are usually surprised at how nice and normal and down-to-earth heavy metal guys are. It's such a niche kind of scene, and even though it is broad and, it carries over to different cultures and countries and people, it has kind of a small family atmosphere vibe, like when you're on tour or when you're, at a festival or whatever. I think the overwhelming truth about metalhead guys is that they're just really nice, normal people. I think they tend to be a little less egotistical than a lot of other musicians, a little easier to talk to, definitely more normal than most people would think by appearance. But I think that's definitely one of the biggest things that kind of blows people's minds.
Hip-hop fans had plenty to celebrate as well over the years, with rapper Lecrae saying that he was going to give his Easterfest performance his all.
I've heard it's just a massive festival, and it's just an incredible time, and just people coming together and just celebrating, and that's what really gets me excited. Every time I've come to Australia, everyone says, you've got to come to Easterfest, and so I'm just really excited to finally get the opportunity to do it, and I'm going to leave no stone unturned. I'm going to try to give myself a cardiac arrest out there.
And if you loved worship music, there was always plenty on offer, from the likes of UK worship pioneers Delirious to Northern Ireland's Robin Mark, as well as Australian favourites like Hillsong United and Darlene Check. This is Darlene speaking to 96.5 ahead of the 2011 event.
Actually, I'm really excited about Easterfest. I've already been thinking about songs and what would be the best way to start that moment and what would have the most impact. But then every time with the team, wherever we are, we have a plan and we have our songs. But once you start, we could go anywhere. But because we're used to playing and we played together for so long, done life together for so long, we're kind of all ready for things to change and looking and being very aware and awake to hopefully what the Spirit of God is doing and just following that.
Jazz played a huge part in the festival experience over the lifetime of AGMF and Easterfest, with appearances from major players in the Australian jazz scene like James Morrison, Emma Pask and Shani Russell.
It is fantastic to be here back at Easterfest. We've had an absolute ball with you tonight.
Bands like Scat and the Chris Paulson Trio were festival regulars, with Easterfest traditionally closing with the Fancy Pants Ball.
We're Scat. We're a band playing the fancy ball thing, just doing a jam that goes something in time and makes people do some rhymes. Chris Paulson on the keys tonight. He'll be working hard for you guys.
I'm Richard Tile, and I am a musician and a teacher and an arranger and always involved with music. I think the first jazz that I got to play with was the boys from Scat. They had me playing a trombone for their Fancy Pants Ball. And I can't even tell you what year that was, but I think it's fair to say it was early or mid-2000s, something like that. And it kind of grew from there. Certainly in Brisbane, there were a fairly live group of musicians in Brisbane who were playing jazz and were in churches, and it just seemed to connect at the same time as the festival was on. During those years, there were just a lot of active 20-year-olds willing to just jump in and try and make as much good music as possible. In 2009, I started my own group, the Empty Chair Project. I contacted the organisers saying, I reckon I've got an idea that might be a bit of fun. Take some of their artists and jazz up their songs. It was my life for about 2 years at no wage. I wasn't earning a cent. To say it was for love could be one thing, but actually it was much more kingdom focused. I think the first time we had to really sort of articulate what the idea was to take an artist song, have them sing their own melody, but with my background, I would take all the musical structures away and find a way to get them to sing their melody with brand new chords underneath, which is challenging. Like, hats off to those singers who were brave, who had all the oral cues from their own song taken away and then have to sing their own song, and it probably didn't feel like their own song. I remember a couple of them in 2010 just looked at me and went, okay, let's go. It's like let's ride this wave and see if the jazz gets us all the way to the end. How much work was there? Yeah, it was hours and hours. And then I think there were a couple of hard moments where an artist would say yes and then they pulled back, and I'd already written the arrangement and they were out, and I thought, well, there goes that time. But I loved what it was. I loved the music we made. There was one year, I think we did 7 different sets and none of them were the same. And I think that was the difference that we had. We had a lot of pro musos sitting in those chairs in the Empty Chair Project, and for them, it was a case of they got to play some written music that was written specifically for that event, bespoke sort of stuff. And I know some of the singers couldn't get enough of what they had. They kind of looked around and found themselves surrounded by 17, 18 musicians on stage, which, they might come from a 3 or 4 piece band. So for them, it was a bit of a hoot. The opportunities were before us, and I think it was a both and. The festival wanted it and we wanted it, but we had to work to get it. So it was a case of always putting forward something that people wanted, and certainly the Fancy Pants Ball was always a case of that, and working with Craig and Jeremy and Chris and Trent, some of those guys who were staples for the festival. Dave and Isaac obviously valued local talent, and obviously there was some connection with seeing it happen with like a more funk-based New World Sun. Some of those guys we got to connect with who were in that genre, and definitely had a jazz influence. Most of us knew that everything we were trying to do during the festival time had the best of intentions, as in it was a gospel reason. It wasn't for our own glory. It was definitely for the glory of God. Certainly that was front and center for me, and my involvement and trying to flex the creative side of me in terms of writing music for the Empty Chair, the big band that we had. Certainly that was an opportunity to try and push those things forward.
We've transformed it from an empty shell of a shop somewhere in Toowoomba, and we've made it into a hip sort of retro chic jazz venue. It's called The Upbeat.
This is Craig Burnett of Scat talking to Good TV in 2014 about the new jazz venue at Easterfest.
Well, Easterfest has always had a strong jazz element. Like Scat, my crew, we've been around for 10 years, and there's been other jazz and related acts, and we kind of thought, you know what, we did the Jazz Supper Club last year with James Morrison, and that was great. And so we said to the Easterfest team, can we program a whole set of jazz?
And from the success of the venue, it looks like it will be back next year.
The festivals were massive. So after a few years of sort of slogging it out in Brisbane, Rookie went full-time touring Australia, and we would play high schools and then play shows on the weekend for all the kids in that area. So we would go to, say, you know, a part of Sydney, and we would play high schools all week in that particular area with the intent of inviting kids to an event at the youth group that brought us out, and you'd come and see us play and maybe a couple other bands. And it was an opportunity for us to share our message and what we were about.
For a band like Rookie, who'd gone full-time, those festival appearances helped keep them on the road and helped grow their profile. This is Rookie's guitarist, Nathaniel McManus.
Those festivals were magic because it was like a one-time shot at possibly a big crowd. So they were hugely beneficial for us. At Easterfest, like, we got to play main stage a couple of times. We headlined the Big Top a couple of times. You know, our last ever show as a band was at the Big Top, and we played right before And a Skeptic. Pre-social media, it was definitely how you got the word out there, because there was no... I think we had a website, rookie.com.au, that people could go to, and there were like chat boards and things like that, and but there was no such thing as Facebook. There was no Instagram or TikTok or any of that. But yeah, Easterfest was definitely the one. Like, I think because it was spread over 3 days and because it was so eclectic in music choices that people would go to see, you know, David Meese, or they'd go to see Rebecca St. James or something, and they just wander through the festival, and you couldn't help but just kind of get drawn into a tent to hear, you know, you might go, oh, that sounds interesting, I'll go in and check that out. And I think that was how a lot of those bands, and us included, got to connect with a lot of fans that might normally not have come and seen us or heard of us or checked us out. So a lot of times youth pastors or people from all around Australia would come to Easterfest because it was the place to be. And, you know, they'd come up to you and go, hey, man, I have a church in Adelaide and we'd love to get you guys down for a week to come and play at some schools and stuff like that. I know for a fact that we booked a bunch of tours out of Easterfest performances. And we made lifelong friends out of it. You know, like some of these tours that we got to do because of Easterfest was incredible.
One major benefit of AGMF and Easterfest was the legitimacy it gave to Australian artists and bands who had ambitions of touring or even relocating overseas. If you could really pull a crowd in Toowoomba, those performances could mean building connections and relationships with overseas artists, as well as opening doors internationally, particularly in the US. This is Phil Gordian of the Paul Coleman Trio.
I think we gained a lot of great experience through AGMF in ways more than just the music. You know, as young guys growing up, we played a lot of other people's music, playing in cover bands in secular settings, I guess you'd say, pubs and bars and stuff in Melbourne. And when, you know, that's how we learnt our craft before we started as the trio, as coming together. But, you know, none of us had really, I guess, could say that we played to more than maybe 1,000 people, you know. But AGMF certainly helped us in that, you know, larger outdoor crowd, X number of thousand people, you know, building us in that extra experience in the ways of helping us learn how to entertain and keep a crowd of that size, you know, which is exactly what, you know, began to happen for us as we got to the US later in 2001. One of our favourite stories is opening for POD at a festival in California, and probably a crowd of 3,000 to 5,000 people, and you know, AGMF certainly contributed to that. You know, the experience that we'd got to stand, even just to stand as a band in front of a crowd that size, and that gave us, you know, really good confidence moving forward in the US, to New Zealand, to Europe, just that's kind of extra notch on your belt, I guess, experience. And just, even on just understanding the logistics of how a festival works, and there's teams of stage crew trying to get gear on and off the stage really quickly, and merchandising staff, and all that sort of stuff that goes on behind the scenes as well. It was so good to have experience from AGMF in those areas. So yeah, we're always grateful when we think about how it helped us, playing to large audiences, building us up, and the other thing, I guess, Justin, is there's a certain heat or, kind of intensity that you've got to bring in as a muso as you're following other artists, because maybe a little bit of that sort of competitive spirit comes out, like you always want to do well when you're following someone else. And over the years, after that, we were thrown in to playing after some, really formidable and amazing artists. And so, all of that experience adds up, and we were never intimidated following other artists, but it definitely taught us, AGMF taught us to get our game on, and really be organised and ready to hit the stage.
This is Paul Coleman.
Easterfest wasn't the only springboard, but it was definitely the biggest. But Sunfest was also big for us. The great thing about Easterfest and things like Sunfest and Parachute in New Zealand was that they could be something that bands could come over for, and then they would do other shows. And so towards the late 90s, we weren't pulling a big crowd, but we were pulling a decent-sized crowd. And so they would attach us, we were creating a bit of attention for ourselves. So I think without those catalysts, it's hard to even imagine that we would have had the gall to think we could just move over there and do something. I think it gave us confidence. You'd sit there and you'd be able to go talk to someone who's from this band, and they would give you advice about how to do things and how to do this and how to do that. So yes, I do think it was really important, very much so. And we went to the States in sort of like 2002, so it was quite early on. But I do think that in that early stage, having the biggest audience we may have had would have been at AGMF or Easterfest.
Alabaster Box got their start on the Gold Coast in the late 90s. Fronted by Nara Seagrot and with her husband Brett on guitar, the band took out 96.5's Talent Search, the Creative Challenge, in 1998. They won a stack of Queensland Recording Industry Awards in 1999 for their debut album and solidified their lineup, adding bassist Matt Smallbone, who had cut his teeth playing for cousin Rebecca St. James in the US.
My band, Alabaster Box, as our profile grew around the country, we had a number of great opportunities to play the festival. For the first, couple of years, we'd play, I think, 4 or 5 different sets at various stages all around the place. And eventually, the year we graduated to the main stage was a very special time for us. And that really changed. That moment, it had become such a big deal, Easterfest, and playing in front of thousands of people on that main stage. We could then suddenly, we would really play anywhere around Australia, and people were excited that we were there because they had seen us play at such a massive event, and so that it really did pump our tires really quite well.
You guys will know this next song, so sing along if you do, but let's get a bit of a groove started right here. Everyone clapping along like this, and even off the back.
Through the early 2000s, Alabaster Box had become one of the biggest Christian acts in Australia, playing hundreds of shows around the country each year. By 2004, the band has released 3 albums, is one of the most played artists on Christian radio, and after multiple AGMF mainstage appearances, is eyeing off the US.
I think Easterfest gave us vision for what might be possible for us as a band. A couple of those main stage appearances went very, very well for us. And it just gave us the confidence that we may have something to offer the world outside of Southeast Queensland. So it was really kind of inspired us to risk and make that move to the United States, which was just, a wonderful season. So many great stories.
In 2006, Alabaster Box relocate to America, spending close to 4 years on the road and releasing their biggest album, We Will Not Be Silent, in 2008, an album they would actually launch at the inaugural Easterfest. This is vocalist Nara speaking to 96.5 in 2010.
Well,
we based ourselves in Nashville, which was an amazing place to live. We loved it there, and we got to visit all parts of America. And we went over to Canada as well a couple of times, and during that, I mean, they love Aussies over there, so we felt really welcome, but we just had some incredible experiences and also really learnt a lot as a band while we were there too. We sold lots of albums and were able to get into a lot of good festivals over there and play against some of the great bands that have been around for many years, and even just, I think, being able to sit back and listen to those guys and ask questions on different things through the industry and even with songwriting and stuff like that. When we got to see Switchfoot, it was a lot of fun. I think it was one of the festivals that we were playing at the time in Kentucky, actually, and we were all pretty excited about that. But, I mean, there's heaps of people we've had great opportunities of being able to meet on the road, and even Michael W. Smith, I mean, he's been around forever. I remember listening to him when I was really young as well, but getting to know him as well was a great opportunity for us.
When Alabaster Box took a hiatus in 2010, bassist Matt Smallbone was one of the members who would elect to stay in the US, eventually becoming Michael W. Smith's bass player.
I love Matt. That guy is a gem. And, man, I miss him terribly. But I'm telling you what, there's not a better hang. The guy is so real authentic. He's so much fun to be with. And he was a joy to play with. I mean, everybody loved Matt. And I don't know if Matt's got an enemy anywhere, but, boy, the guy was so great on stage. But more importantly, his heart. He's got a great wife. He's got great kids. So I miss him terribly. Hopefully one day he'll be back on stage with Smitty.
And I tell you what, I couldn't think of anywhere better to be than in Easterfest in Toowoomba right now. What about you?
One of the biggest success stories of the Easterfest years was a band from the Shire in Sydney called New Empire. They had it all, the songs, the look and the stage presence. And in a few short years had gone from playing one of the smaller stages to playing main stage. This was followed by widespread radio airplay and a record deal with the US alternative rock label Tooth and Nail. This is Jeremy Fowler from New Empire.
I remember we were playing, I think it was Saturday at like 12 p.m. I think it was our first year. We were playing in I think it was called The Alley at the time. But we were playing in the middle of the day. It was something like, in the tent, it was something like 50 degrees. And there was a pretty good turnout. I think a couple of hundred people came out to see us. But we were pretty much totally unknown in Queensland or anywhere at the time. And I remember after the show just sitting out the front of the tent, kind of just going, well, that was kind of fun, and being in this place of just going, well, it would be cool to see kind of what happens in the future and if we can kind of be invited back and see where we go. And then from there, I think the next year we kind of played in the Big Top, and then from then on it kind of just kept stepping up. So I just feel really, really thankful that the guys have kind of got behind us, and just everyone there. We just love the whole community behind Easterfest and all the people. It's always about the community and always about, just the people that come.
The growth in popularity of New Empire, assisted by appearances at events like Easterfest, would help open up more doors for the Sydney four-piece, like their song One Heart Million Voices being used in major promotional campaigns.
A couple of years ago when the London Olympics was on, having One Heart Million Voices as kind of the song in Australia for all the promotion was definitely something that was a highlight for us, and we didn't actually think it would probably blow up to be what it did, but it was a real honour to do that, and also being able to, I think, signing with an American record label, our guys over there, Tooth and Nail, a label that we've grown up listening to a lot of our favourite bands, like Emberlyn and Copeland and Under Oath and those kind of bands, and so being part of that family as well has been another bit of a pinch yourself moment. But it's funny, in this industry you just never know what's around the corner.
One of the huge benefits of a festival like Easterfest, alongside other Christian music events like Black Stump, Forest Edge and Parachute in New Zealand, is that they absolutely help to grow the music industry. And that's evident nowadays. No festivals, less opportunities, means less bands and artists getting in there and giving it a go. This is Jeremy Fowler again.
I think festivals are really, really important for a lot of different reasons. I love festivals because they bring the wider musical community together in one place. You can get a lot wider range of people and bigger numbers of people together at one space in time. You can also get new talent, and there's so many new opportunities for bands that are up and coming. They're kind of given this stage they usually wouldn't have in front of thousands of people. So it's kind of like a launching pad for a lot of people that usually wouldn't have that opportunity. I think that's why it's really, really important for our industry.
It's a sentiment echoed by Nara from Alabaster Box.
I think it's just a great opportunity for Aussie bands to be able to come out and to be able to play, and it's an opportunity for them to show people what they're doing, and there's such a huge variety of different types of music as well. I think that's something we've always loved about Easterfest. It's really family friendly. There's such a huge variety for people and for different age groups too.
I think the amazing thing about that era, though, is that it was an investment, and it's actually had waves of continuing influence. And I know we still bump into people who remember particularly our music, but I'm sure this happened with many other artists who say how much it influenced their life and their faith.
Phil Gordian of the Paul Coleman Trio.
If that's the investment and if that's all it did, it definitely inspired a lot of people to dig deeper into their faith and live out what they've been called to do. And I think if that's the fruit of it, then that's actually really satisfying and, mission accomplished. That's the job done. And I think everyone involved should be really, really proud of that.
I hope you've enjoyed looking back at some of the artists that made Easterfest what it was over the years. Next time on the podcast, we'll be looking at the experience of Easterfest. What kind of things went into the festival experience to make it more than just about the music?
We tried everything over the years. I remember doing snowboarding in Queen's Park, where we got a big ice manufacturer and they trucked in lots of ice, and then we smashed it all up and towed people behind motorbikes on snowboards, and there was a lot of accidents and people breaking their arms and a lot of stuff you wouldn't get away with actually today.
There was a rodeo and we got so much heat from the animal rights activists. Back then we had faxes, and we'd be getting faxes from them all the time, getting mad about the fact that we had a rodeo.
That's next time on the Rise and Fall of Easterfest. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, follow, whatever it is in your podcast app, so you know when the next episode drops. I'm Justin Rouillon. Thanks for listening.